bit of a something special called Wisdom Wednesdays. So sometimes it looks like me planning the worship set for my church. Sometimes it looks like us hanging out with Catherine Naomi, another streamer, and like discussing theology. But this week is our first special guest segment that I'm starting, where we're going to be covering all sorts of various tough topics. You know, the things that are super important, but though like a lot of people don't like talking about them because they get too heated or political, things like that. So, and I'd also welcome in Quimbley. Good to see you in here as well. Hello. And yes, and Alec is here as well. Welcome in. So good to see all the y'all in the here. Yes. Alrighty, and I guess that leads me over to let's go ahead and bring over this amazing man here, Steve. Hello. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, great to be with you here tonight. You said this amazing man. I started looking around. Where is there an amazing man somewhere? But hey, so thanks for that, Will. My name is Steve. I happen to not just be a friend of Will, but also related by blood here. So really great to be with you here tonight. Really excited to connect with you on this topic that's really near and dear to my heart. Really grateful too for your viewers who just have a passion or an interest in wisdom. I just think that's spot on. We really want to grow in that. So thanks so much for having me out tonight.
Yeah, no, exactly. I appreciate that. Oh, Alec here in the chat saying that that it's a pleasure to have you here, saying hello to you. Yeah.
Thank you, Alec. Thank you.
Yeah. But yeah, so I should probably give you the links in case you want to have chat up in front of you. But yes,
I'll take it.
There we go. Yeah. So yeah, you said that this topic, which by the way, for those for those that haven't read the little title underneath of me on the screen here, today we are discussing abortion and the rights of children in the womb. So that's the topic at hand. And again, like I said, this is something that gets very political. And the reason that I chose that wording, rights of children in the womb, is because a lot of people on the other side like to say it's about the rights of women, but you either way you have to be denying someone their quote unquote rights, right? So that's actually kind of what I wanted to lean into here first, though, is like, who has the right, do you think, Steve?
Well, that's a really interesting way to approach it, because as I think about the issue of life, I think about there are just different ways to approach it. There is asking ourselves. You can ask yourself the question, hey, what is true biologically or scientifically, right? You can ask yourself what is true legally, which is what you're doing there when you start talking about rights. You can also ask questions about morality, and you could wonder, hey, what's a good moral choice, or even like a form of morality, or a topic that people approach things a lot from is philosophy, right? And so I think these are some important distinctions, because have you ever heard anyone say, hey, I don't believe something unless you can prove it to me scientifically? Is that something you've heard someone say before?
Oh, sure.
Yeah. And so, let's take, for example, let's pretend, Will, that you were born in a hospital called First Hospital of Tallahassee, right? Let's pretend you were born there. And then you were to say, well, hey, yeah, I was born in First Hospital of Tallahassee. And I would say, well, I'd like you to prove that to me scientifically. You'd be kind of hard pressed to do that, because, several years ago when you were born. Since then, they've kind of cleaned the room out since then, right? And it's very unlikely that your DNA is still behind in that room, right? So it'd be really hard to prove scientifically that you were there. I think, though, one way of proof that comes in is legal proof, right? And so what we would do if we were trying to prove that you were born in First Hospital Tallahassee is we would get some eyewitnesses and we'd line them up and they'd say, oh yeah, I was there. Maybe they get your mom out. Maybe they get your dad out, maybe they'd get a family member that says, oh yeah, I came and visited that hospital right after he was born, So I think that's a really important thing, just starting off with how are we going to approach this issue, and what ways are we going to talk, scientifically?
You're my friend now. We're having soft tacos later.
But so that was very long intro there to really talk about the question you asked is, who has the right to be born? And I think one way to approach that question is well, what does the law say right now? And of course, we happen to be in America, and I don't know about you, but the only perspective that I have is from my eyes right here, and I can kind of look around and see from my perspective, right? It's kind of hard now. I can imagine what it might be like to be in Mexico or Canada, or to be in Germany or South Africa or Nigeria. But, ultimately my experience, I kind of start with the United States. So just starting there, who has the right to be born? Well, today, depending upon the state that you're in, the people who have the right to be born are the people whose parents choose for them to be born, right? So that's the answer to the question there. Now that's what it is, but then the question is what should it be, right? Isn't that the next question, Will? What should the case be?
Yeah, because from the legal standpoint, right? Like we should. You can go into a whole debate on separation of church and state that we probably don't have time to get into. But though, our morals should go into our law at the end of the day, and from a moral standpoint, if we are saying that this is a life, right? Then shouldn't that life have the right to live, essentially? And also welcome in Tracy 1966, which I'm assuming is my mother, probably following me here. Thank you for pressing the follow button. Welcome in. No sound? That is anyone else having that issues, or is it just her? Because that would be a whole thing and a half if that this whole intro is gone. Quimbley can hear? Okay, so it is.
Yeah, if you'd like, I could start motioning words that maybe she could, maybe read my motions. Would that help?
Well, just speak loud enough and see if she can hear you from across the street.
There it is. Good choice.
Yeah. Alrighty. And Bogart's welcome in. Good to have you in here. Yes. So, continuing our discussion though. So, yeah, so you mentioned people wanting scientific proof, but a lot of people these days, especially of my generation, are subscribed to what you call postmodernism, wherein instead of it being like, give me the facts and proof, it's like, my feelings are the facts and proof, right? So because I feel this way, that makes it more real, because emotions make lies feel more real. And so when these, so there's all these women out there that think like, oh, there's this foreign being as they wrongly perceive it, in my belly, in my womb, what I should have the right over my body, essentially, to to do as I please. What would you say to those people?
Yeah, I think I just have a lot of compassion for some of the difficulties that people are experiencing, right? And so the scenario you described where someone feels like, hey, I should have bodily autonomy and, I really should be able to do what I want with my body. There's a very famous phrase that people approach. I don't approach it this way, but the phrase is, don't you think, Steve, that a woman should have a right to do whatever she wants with her body? And, I think I think most of us, if not all of us, would agree. Well, yes. I mean, we really do think that. But there really are some exceptions to that. Like if I, with my body, I want to go into a stranger's home and eat food out of their fridge and lay in their bed. I'm just not allowed to do that. That's a form of trespassing, right? And they're going to lock me up for that, right? And so there are some limits to what we actually can do. And I think, when I hear someone, kind of share that concern, I think really the place where I like to start is, well, what are we talking about? What is inside your body? Okay, because here's the big phrase: from the earliest moments of conception, we have a distinct human that is different from the mother and different from the father, right? So it is a whole new set of DNA, right? And so from my worldview, we call it a person. And so ultimately, what I really want to do in that scenario is have a sense of compassion for people who may feel very strongly that they're struggling with the scenario. Maybe they didn't mean to get pregnant, right? And so we want to have compassion about that scenario. Maybe they just can't imagine a world where they're a parent. We want to have compassion about that. We want to be able to talk to them about that. Ask them questions, right? Maybe they can't, maybe they didn't have good parents and their only viewpoint of a parent is someone who doesn't do a good job taking care of others, right? And they're really just afraid, right? And so, in that kind of scenario, in that conversation, for my own personal convictions, yes, I really want to have a clear understanding that we have a unique individual from the earliest moments from conception. But in a conversation with someone, the thing that's gonna, I think, be helpful in play is really to ask them questions, right? Hey, what helped you come to that conclusion? What makes you draw that conclusion to that in that scenario? Why do you feel that way? What do you think that way? What's okay? It sounds like having a baby is concerning to you. What seems concerning to you, right? And then hopefully we can have a dialogue.
Absolutely. And then some people in chat. So Quimbley saying, as a woman, the bodily autonomy was the choice that led to the baby being there. You don't sacrifice a child. And then Alex saying, even science agrees that life begins at conception, which is something that you were starting to get at, how distinct that being is. Yeah, the child is 100% worth protecting. I want to put a pin in what Quimbley was saying there, because I feel like we can get around to when that wasn't a choice. But first I do want to kind of dial in on how you define the child, because Alec is saying that even science agrees that life begins at conception. Do you want to kind of speak to how we can define something as a child?
Mm-hmm. I don't know if you've ever, maybe when you were younger, you were in an argument and you're like, hey, no, I didn't eat the last cookie. But then someone says, well, yeah, you did. And they're like, prove you didn't. And you're like, well, I don't have to prove I didn't eat the cookie. You have to prove that I did, right? So, where is that burden of proof, right? And so, for me, I really like to, from my perspective, the claim here is that from the earliest moment of conceptions, we have, of conception, singular, conceptions if there's twins or triplets, sorry. From the earliest moment of conception, we're talking about a distinct individual. And then, I would say, help me understand why that's not the case. And then from, if you're familiar with this word apologetics or making an apology for something, it doesn't mean saying I'm sorry. It means giving a case, a reason, an argument for why something is valuable or true. There's people will say that essentially abortion should be okay for four main reasons. Okay. Are you ready for these 4 reasons?
Do it.
They follow an acronym, right? The letters SLED, SLED. So I don't know if you've ever gone sledding. I don't know if it's snowy where you live or grow up, if you've ever gone sledding. But you can just think about the sled, right? Mm-hmm. Picture a nice sled there. The first letter is S, okay? So what people will do is, that stands for size. People will say, well, because the human is small, they're not a human. Okay, because they're small, they're not a human. Well, that's actually pretty arbitrary. Okay, and using that same logic, it's really interesting when we take someone's thought line and we look to apply it in other places. And then if you don't have a basics for how small, is it, well, someone who's under 5 feet 9 inches really isn't a person, right? Well, how can I make that claim? What kind of evidence do I have? Well, it's the same. I can't make that claim, or I can't say people above 6'10", they're just inhuman. They're not humans. I can't say that because I am just arbitrarily making up this argument, this term size. And so someone says, well, they're small, they're really and they are pretty tiny. We're all tiny at one point in time, right? So that really doesn't make a difference, right? So the next argument, so that's S for size, right? Mm-hmm. The next is L, okay? That's level of development. So someone might say, oh, because the baby, or they might say the fetus, right? But I would say the baby, because they fully don't have all of their lung function, they're not a human. Okay, like if you look in the womb, at XYZ weeks, they don't have all their lung function, they're not a human. Well, do we take people on breathing machines at the hospital, and do we just pull them off life support because they're not a human? No, we don't do that, right? And that's the same kind of concept here. Their level of development isn't going to, or if someone doesn't pass, let's just even say, if someone doesn't pass the 5th grade, they're not very developed. They're not a human, right? So, in that sense, we're again arbitrarily making up what is a human, and there is no way that we can claim a standard, because otherwise we can start shifting that standard, right? And so, some might say, well, well, here's the next one, right? We have S, we have our L. Here's our E, our environment. Okay, if a baby is inside the womb, it's not a person, it's not a baby. But if somehow the baby's taken out of the womb, then they are a baby, right? And that is the case legally in America. But just because it's that, right? We talk about legal truth versus what's moral, or even philosophy here. Just because of the environment, I don't know how thick the walls of the skin are and the uterus, but how does changing that environment, make it? So by that argument, you can say, well, if anyone is in outer space, let's say they're on the International Space Station, they're not a human because they're not in the environment that I've determined is human, right? They're alien. So that is, we've gone over size. We've gone over L for level of development. E for environment. Will, do you want to guess what the D stands for?
Oh, interesting. I can't guess. No, go ahead.
Maybe someone can put on the chat, if someone could guess on the chat what the the D stands for. We'll read that out. But I'm going to tell you here. So I know I didn't give you much time. I should have done that ahead of time. The D stands for degree of dependency, right? So someone might say, well, a baby in the womb is not a person because they're dependent on their mother to provide nourishment through the umbilical cord, right? However, we know that, again, it's an arbitrary thing. We all have different levels of dependency. Like my wife would tell you that I'm very needy, right? But all that to say, that's a certain degree of dependency, and she thinks my might even be inhuman on some level. But ultimately, we all have a degree of dependency, and again, it's arbitrarily making a choice. And so, do we say, obviously, a child in second grade really can't work for themselves. They can't do that really legally. But they just don't have the level of development to be able to get a job, to provide a house, shelter, cook, clean, make it in society. We don't expect a second grader to do that, but we wouldn't say that second grader isn't a human just because they might have a higher degree of dependency. And we got to be careful too, Pete, when we use arguments based upon that are arbitrary, because maybe someone might say in the future, and we've seen this in certain, former governments, right, in the 20th century. Well, hey, if you're dependent upon the state to survive, for food or clothing, then you're not really a person, and you're deplorable, or we're gonna really kind of get rid of you there. So, that's something that we really need to avoid, having that mentality. We've got to have a better ethic and ethos there. So, yeah. So those are the four arguments that I typically hear, and they all fit into that category. That you can do some research on those ideas. I didn't come up with those ideas. Scott Klusseldorf is Dr. Scott Klusseldorf. He's a graduate of Talbot School of Theology, which is in California, part of Biola University. And he wrote a book called The Case for Life that these days is kind of the standard for apologetics on the issue.
Yeah, that's a great. I love that acronym. That is really helpful to put in those categories, because I've heard those individually before, but to have it packaged nicely like that, because here's the thing. Even if y'all watching this right now are already on board about the things that we are saying, being able to then regurgitate that to others and have proof and evidence as to why we think the way we do. If we can equip all y'all with that would be very helpful. That would be, as the kids say, peak.
Nailed it. Peak.
Quimbley sad because I guess she's not a person for being short. Oh gosh. But anyways.
I gotta ask you this question here, Will. What's a poke check? Help me understand what that is.
So there's a game that people in my chat can play where they can catch Pokemon, and that there is just me checking if I've already caught that Pokemon before or not. But yes.
Oh, looks like Firo escaped. That's really sad. No one caught Firo.
Check your pokes at the door.
Oh, love it, Quimbley. Yeah, Quimbley wants to get down to business. We don't need to be poking here while we're on this important Wisdom Wednesday topic.
Oh, for sure. Okay, I want to unpin what Quimbley had said earlier about the woman making the choices that led to the baby being there, because I mentioned at the time when I pinned it, there is a scenario where a woman might say, "I did not make that choice to have that baby put there. Perhaps she was forcefully come upon, and that conception was a product of rape, or anything along those lines." What would you? And I'm sure that you've encountered women like that in your job as well. What do you do with those scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, that is a terrible, awful, painful, horrendous, horrific experience. And again, we want to express high levels of compassion towards people who've just experienced these kind of levels of hardship. And I think the reality is, if we've not gone through something like that, I talked earlier on about perspective, only perspective I have is mine. You can try to imagine, just even imagining it, it's just super difficult. And so when people experience this level of trauma or hardship, there's any one of a number of reactions they can have, and they can be any one in a number of places. And, in my profession, I've had people come and tell me about some of these negative experiences here, where, I use the term assault. And there is a real sense where, maybe a different topic for a different day, and you just kind of wonder, oh my goodness, how can this happen? How could we live in a world where this is a reality? I think in any kinds of these scenarios, depending upon where, someone is, emotionally, where they are, we just want to address any kind of immediate concerns first. This can really stimulate someone towards suicidal ideation. This can really stimulate someone towards maybe manic episodes, or just anxiety, just a loss of a sense of control. They can be a lot of different numbers of places. And so, I think what the first thing is to really address, really where someone is, and especially if we're kind of an emergency scenario. But, pretending a scenario, or just a hypothetical scenario where someone's had a chance to process on some level, and now they're genuinely asking the question, what do I do? They're at a point where they're looking to make a decision. What is the right choice here? And, again, I think that I have a friend. He's a Jewish man. He grew up an atheist, and his argument is, well, why not at least give the child a chance, right? Why not at least give them a chance to live and to experience, reality there, to experience, life outside the womb. And I think for some of our listeners, that might really trigger like an emotional response, in the sense that, it might even be like, well, yeah, let people live. So let's try to talk about it, I guess, more philosophically. Is someone any less a human because of the way they were conceived, right? And I think, again, if we look at, the phrase, from the earliest moments of conception, a person is a unique individual, unique human with a unique set of DNA. They're really not any less of a human in that sense. And so, because we haven't fleshed this out too much here in this conversation, I think we've kind of assumed it, but, humans have an inherent worth. They're, worth more than ants. They're worth more than owls, or they're worth more than horses, right? Humans have this inherent worth, and it's because they bear the image of the creator of the universe, right? And so, that's really ultimately how I approach the issue. And, if I didn't have that worldview, I think I might really struggle. I might look at things more pragmatically or more practically. But even looking, let's just for a second look pragmatically. I've got a friend, her name's Cindy, and she was conceived through, her mom was sexually assaulted, and as a result, she's alive today. Her mom chose life, and she is so grateful to be alive. She has kids, she's a grandparent now, and she is just so thankful for the opportunity for life. And just because the nature of her conception doesn't mean she is less a person. Now, all that to say, we still want to acknowledge how incredibly difficult the experience might be for someone who hasn't experienced that kind of assault. And we really want to come around and support people. I think one of the bad raps that the pro-life community, or people who believe that children begin from the early stages of conception, one of the perspectives that I think people have, that it's just not an accurate take, is that, people who care about those in the womb don't really care about them after they're born, right? And I can tell you, just from my experience, nothing could be further from the truth. I mean, I've just seen, of course, after the baby's born, people continue and their level of support and care. I've seen, people hire new moms, business owners hire new moms and just make a lot of accommodations for them. I've seen, people, babysit, tutor, teach kids how to read. There's just a lot of support for women and for families, especially, I think, from people who have an ethic of life. And so I think it's one of those things, I call it it seems like that logical fallacy of a red herring. Well, you don't really care after they're born. You don't really care what that woman experiences during those 9 months of pregnancy. Well, actually, we do, and we like to come around people. So here's a like, when we think about that issue, right? Which is, and I think this. It's less than 1% of all pregnancies, right? So we're talking about a real minority experience. Now, I think it should be a 0% experience, but we live in a world that it just falls on evil here. But one of the things that we really want to ask ourselves, and the things that we really want to address as we're thinking about the issue of life and we're thinking about it, is, have you ever thought about the positive benefit that kids can be in your life? Have you ever thought about that, right? I mean, because kids, I've noticed this. I have some myself. They're actually enjoyable to be around at times. Teenage years, we won't talk about that on this show, right? Because we're going to play to our strengths, not talk about what's difficult. But they're actually enjoyable to be around, and they could be about. I mean, there are kids. They could even save your life. There are kids who have donated kidneys to their parents. Because they're a DNA match or a positive match. So I think one thing that we can't see when we're in a crisis, maybe there's been an assault, is we can't see sometimes a future forward that is positive and that involves joy. And I just think what in addition to the kind of care and support over that negative experience, people just need to understand a vision for parenthood that's positive, right? I think we often, particularly in America, which is my worldview, we think of kids in financial ways, right? You think about, oh gosh, the kids are so expensive. Oh yeah. Well, yeah, but just think, they could also be supporting you in your old age, right? I mean, who else is going to do that? I mean, the government isn't going to do its best job to do that. It just so happens that my mom is no longer cognitively able to care for herself. Yeah. And what would she do without her children to come alongside her and support her during this scenario? I mean, it could have been pretty terrible. So, Will, just in thinking about that issue, and thanks for bringing that up, because people really do have a hard time with it. And I think that can be helpful as we think about, what's going on here. Again, the way that we were conceived doesn't impact our level of humanity.
And to clarify this we that Steve was talking about, it's the ministry that he's executive director for, Life Forward, which helps these women in need in these stressful situations to be able to get the resources that they need in these situations. Free mammograms, and what are some of the other resources? Just kind of.
Yeah, well, we don't do mammograms yet, but we are starting women's primary health care. But the kind of resources that pregnancy resource centers do, and they're all over the country. There's at least 3,300 pregnancy resource centers. They initially someone might come to them because they're pregnant or think they're pregnant, and on some level it's a crisis for them, right? And so it might be an emotional challenge, it might be a spiritual challenge, might be material. In other words, they can't afford things like diapers or strollers or formula. And so they come into a pregnancy resource center, and they'll be greeted, of course, very warmly, and then they'll start a conversation. There'll be a pregnancy test. A lot of them have ultrasounds where you can see your baby on the screen and hear your baby's heartbeat. It's a pretty amazing era that we live in. Never before in the history of humanity have you been able to safely see inside the womb, right? Now we could see right in the womb, and because of this technology, kids will have surgery in the womb to repair issues, like maybe there's a heart valve condition that needs surgery before they're even born. It's just really mind-boggling. And
yeah.
So I'm just by what we're able to see into these days. So the pregnancy resource centers will often come alongside women with that kind of a resource. And then if you can imagine any concern a new parent might have, a pregnancy resource center is going to try to address it. Maybe it's, hey, I don't know how to be a parent. Well, hey, we've got parenting classes, and we've got one-on-one mentorship with someone who's been a mom that can help come alongside you in that. Maybe you're just, I don't know how to diaper a baby, or just how do you feed a baby? I don't know that. Well, hey, we've got both group and one-on-one classes where we can go over those things with you. Well, I don't know if I can afford strollers or formula. Hey, guess what? We can help you, give you strollers and formula, and help you get connected with social services and really come alongside you in these things. So really, that's the goal. Any concern someone might have, we want to come alongside them in that.
Yes. All right, and Lizzie, welcome in, also known as Devaraya. Thank you for the thank you for listening in. And I'm going to put a pin in your point there, there, Lizzie, because that can be a whole good discussion. And I see Bogarts and Alec have both asked a questions. We'll go in order of which one was posted first. Alec asking a question. He considers himself an abolitionist. Are you aware of what that is, and what are your thoughts on it?
Yeah. So, here's what I think he's referring to. So in America today, I talked about America being my perspective. They call it modern day abolitionism, right? And so abolition movements, generally speaking, are to free people who are enslaved, okay? And so persons who have been enslaved against their will. And of course, we hear this term common in the mid 19th century, the 1800s, when people talked about freeing people who had been enslaved because of their skin color. And so, today there is a movement to say, hey, babies are people, right? And so, we don't want to give them and assign them anything less than fully human, right? And so we want them to be, freed in that sense. And so, I think that's what they're referring to, and I think that's kind of what I've heard as people talk about the issue of modern day abolitionism.
Yeah. And would you agree on those standpoints?
Well, so to the degree that I understand it, so to what I just said, I would agree, but there might be some additional meaning that they're putting in there that I'm not privy to, right? And so I would need to hear a bit more about, well, what do you mean when you say abolitionist? And what are you advocating in that sense? So that's something I'd like to understand more, right? Because there's just one word, and want to understand more about what that means.
And Alec coming and saying, yes, that is what he meant. That's abortion under no circumstances okay and would be considered murder. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things that we talk about is an ectopic pregnancy. And Will, do you know about that? Is that something that you'd like me to talk about?
No, go on.
Yeah, well, let's have a little disclaimer. I am not a medical professional at all. I don't even play one on TV, right? So, but an ectopic pregnancy is a pregnancy. People consider it, generally speaking, a non-viable pregnancy. And so they would say, when I say viable, the belief is medically that, 100% of the time the baby's going to pass away and the mom's going to pass away because of where the baby's located. Sometimes a baby will be inside the fallopian tube, and the baby, instead of being in the womb, right? And so the baby will start to grow, and it'll cause the tube to burst, and would end in the death of the mother, death of the baby. So that's a circumstance where I think people, if there's going to be a gray area, that's where people talk about the risk of the life of the mother. That's that area where some people consider it gray, but just from a medical standpoint, this is an area where, hey, you're going to pass away here, and the baby's going to pass away, because of the nature of this, right? So I think that's something that is worth doing research there, and most people just don't consider that. Yeah. They do not put that in the category of abortion, and I don't personally either. I think, so just when it comes to the issue of life, we, again, distinct humans, and humans are great. I saw someone made a comment, babies are awesome. I happen to agree. I recently gave a speech on this subject, and I guess I didn't say the word baby, and I meant to, but and then some lady on their feedback said, well, that's really disappointing. He never said the word baby. He seemed to try to avoid that topic. No, I love babies. They're a real blessing. I'm not trying to avoid them at all. But I think there's a certain sense. Well, let me just tell you a couple more stories, if that's okay. I don't know how you're doing on time, but I've got time and I've got words. So here we go. There's this woman. Her name's Loretta, and the year was 1979, and she had a fling with a fraternity guy, extramarital relationship. And then she went ahead and went to go backpacking in Europe in the summer of 79. And that summer, while she was in Europe with her friend, she realized, hey, oh my goodness, I'm pregnant from this, fraternity party I went to earlier on here. And her friend was like, hey, listen, we're in France. No one needs to know about this. We can just go have an abortion. Mm-hmm. And she decided not to do that. She had grown up in a family that had a worldview that supports life. And because in the summer of 79, she didn't go to an abortion clinic in France. Because of that, she had her baby, and I have a wife today, right? And that's the story of my wife and my mother-in-law. My mother-in-law has since passed, but I'm just so grateful for the choice that she made when no one would have had to know about it, and it certainly would have been a much easier life for her. So again, just really grateful. But I think sometimes there's a lot of vitriol or hate or animosity towards women who are experiencing unplanned pregnancy. I think they need our compassion and they need our support, because I think there's a certain sense where, we can really come behind them in ways to help get them through a crisis, to where they can go on to have, very meaningful impact and be great parents. And I'm just super grateful for my mother-in-law, just that ultimately she made a sacrifice to continue that pregnancy, and I'm so grateful.
Absolutely, amen. And then Bogart's question, you kind of like half answered here, but though I'll read it off a bit more, is what if the pregnancy threatens the life of the mother in a way that it cannot be continued? Which you talked about when the baby is already dead. But what if it like what if the baby is still alive and is threatening the life of the mother?
Yeah, that's what the only really case that would be in is an ectopic pregnancy, which I talked about earlier, which is in the fallopian tube. There's not a condition. There's nothing that's going to happen with the baby that's going to threaten the mom otherwise. I mean, the baby's not going to pull out a ninja sword and start threatening the life of the mother, otherwise, or there's nothing going to be toxic about having a baby. It just happens to do with the placement in the fallopian tube. And that's a real hardship. And, frankly, I've had conversations with women who have had that experience and, didn't continue the pregnancy. And, even though, it's saving your life and it's saving, and the baby would not have lived anyway, it's still very hard for people. And I just want to express compassion over that scenario because it is a difficult reality. And that should really be our number one response, is a sense of compassion.
Yeah. And I think that transitions well into what Deverai was saying earlier about when women do have these abortions, whether it be through the scenario we were just talking about, or someone has an abortion and then later comes to be convicted about that being murder that they committed, just the spiritual consequences that can be on there, and do you kind of want to, because I know that you've encountered some women in those scenarios before. What do you usually do in those scenarios?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer is I pray for people in those scenarios for healing, and I'm so thankful. There's this scripture. It's the book of Romans, chapter 8, verse 1. There is therefore now no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, right? So if someone, and there, maybe someone listening, or, I do say this, I quote that verse when I go publicly and speak, because the reality is Jesus is able to forgive us of all of our sins, and there is no limit to the power of his blood to do that. There is no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus. And so when we do become Christians, when we do become his, he's able to forgive us of our sins, our past sins, our present sins, our future sins. Yeah. And it's ultimately the work of the enemy who wants to convince you to terminate your pregnancy. And then after you do that, the enemy then wants to bring condemnation and shame and judgment on you, right? So really, it's a double whammy there. So really just, conversations about, with any kind of trauma or difficulty, you want to, maybe sometimes people need counseling or meeting with their pastor, really processing through, journaling. I mean, there are some practical things to help people. This is interesting. There's a tribute wall where, if you have experienced abortion, you could put your baby's name up on the tribute wall and, just really kind of go through a process. It just makes me emotional even now thinking about it. Hey, I'm sorry. We were scared and we didn't, what to do there. But there's this quote by a former president. He said, "No one wants to be judged by what they've done on the darkest day and the darkest hour of their lives." Right. And the truth is, we, for those of us who don't know Jesus as our Savior, we will experience that condemnation. And so that's why it's so important to come to the Lord to experience that rescuing. And, because of Christ, we don't have to be judged by what we've done the darkest day and the darkest hour of our lives. We are just, marked as free. And so, and the other reality is Jesus wants to heal you. He wants to heal, regardless of maybe it's abortion, maybe it's a different issue. He wants to heal you. He is the God who can take away our guilt, take away our shame, and he wants to bring that healing. So we don't need to live in despair. the rest of our lives. There is reason for hope. So I'm just really, really thankful for that reality.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh, that is so good to share. Yeah, because man, it is like you said, we cannot judge them. We have to show compassion, because like that is the same compassion Christ shows to everyone that has gone through those scenarios. Like, man, what the devil has led them to do, or even if it's the devil, like, loves to appeal to our fallen flesh quite a bit. We've talked in some of these previous Wisdom Wednesdays about just our fallen nature and things along those lines. And man, when Christ comes into someone's life and like really like illuminates their sin, he not only does that but also takes away that guilt and shame, which is such an amazing thing that our gracious God does. So I can full-heartedly agree.
Let's talk a little bit more about that, if you don't mind, Will,
for
a second, right? Because what was going on, like in biblical times, is there was some false god worship going on. And what you had to do for the false god worship, and we know these false gods, it's really worshiping the devil, it's worshiping demons, and there was this particular false god named Molech. Okay. And believe it or not, it's clear in scripture, the Israelites, they brought the worship of the false god from Egypt, and they didn't get rid of all their idols in the desert, and they brought them into Israel when they were there. And that was bad for them. The Lord warned them, and it was bad for them. That's why Joshua had to say, choose today whom you will serve. As for me and my house, will serve the Lord. But the worship of the false god Molech, it involved sacrificing your child on an altar. And, the reason why you might do that is so that it would rain, so that you'd have crops. That's just the false mentality, not recognizing our creator. The Lord is the one who provides the rain, that makes the crops, that enables us to eat, right? The Lord's our provider in that sense. And so the crazy thing is, the enemy of the devil doesn't even need you to build a statue to Molech today. And the baby doesn't even have to be born, because the enemy has figured out a way to trick people into choosing to sacrifice their child for the very same reasons. Hey, I just can't afford, this baby, and really that's saying God is not going to provide for me. I'm not going to have enough there. And that's the same reason that people sacrifice then. And so I see Quimbley says the devil has no new tricks. That's exactly it. It's just repackaged, but it's the same. It's the same thing in there each time. I think there's a real sense where, again, we really want to come into the truth that's in Scripture, because that's going to give us just the best way to live life. And we need to know our Scripture well, right? We need to study that and understand it, because it's going to give us the wisdom and God, and help us understand the righteous path in every area of our life, right? Including this issue of life here.
Yeah. And building off of that, what does the Bible have to say about how God views children while they're in the womb?
Yeah. So, the real proof text here is Psalm 139. And this is a Psalm of David. And it says, behold, I am fearfully and wonderfully made. It talks about how we were knit together in our mother's womb, right? And then there is a certain sense where the Lord knows our frame. He sees our frame in the hidden place. In other words, we talked about seeing into the womb with the ultrasound. You used to not be able to see into the womb with the ultrasound. It's like the hidden place. He formed us together. But it does talk about, sinews and ligaments in the Bible, the valley of dry bones. But the Lord is really fashioning us in the womb. And, the Lord, our creator, he doesn't make mistakes. And so, I think an issue that hasn't come up yet is, well, hey, what if there's something wrong with the child? What if there's a Down syndrome, child?
Ooh.
Should someone have an abortion then? And I got to tell you, I don't know if you've spent much time with anyone who has Down syndrome. They are the most loving people you'll ever meet. I mean, the hugs, just they think highly of you, and you haven't even done anything yet. I think there's a certain sense where our perspective, just because someone has an extra chromosome, it does not mean that they're, again, not a human, and that their values really there. And just talk to a family, experience it. They love their child, and it's a blessing. A good friend of mine from high school, just is blessed with a child who has Down syndrome, and I think he's just a sharp young man. And I've had a chance to meet him, and I just think, great guy. I'm really grateful for them. So all that to say, we talked about the Bible, and it talks about how, again, we're formed together. We're fearfully and wonderfully made. The Lord's our creator. How do we know if a husband is blessed, right? How do we know if a husband's blessed by the Lord? It says in the scripture that, his wife will be like a fruitful vine, his children olive shoots around his table. In other words, there's a lot of them. Blessed is the man who, has sons born in one's youth, right? Like a quiver full of arrows, right? So you've heard this phrase, quiver full of arrows in the hand of a warrior. But yeah, there's a certain sense where not once does the Bible talk about a pregnancy or children as a bad thing ever. Not one time. In fact, the worst thing that could happen to you as a woman in the Bible is that you'd be barren and unable to have kids, right? That is kind of this, what's the word? Grievous reality that people have had to deal with. And we know maybe the story of Hannah, who was the mother of Samuel, who was barren for a while. The Lord spoke to her and promised her a son, and she dedicated him. And of course, Samuel was the mentor to King David. So many great things that the Lord does through all of it done really through people, right? He uses people to do that.
Absolutely, and that's so well put. Yeah, another verse that comes to mind was Jeremiah 1, where God says, like, I have formed you in the innermost parts. I knew you, and before you came out of the womb, I set you apart. Like, God foreordains and knows us before we're even born. So just even preconception, just the this idea of of a life being a life, just from how God is the one that is selected and chosen, what a life is. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Here's a really interesting thought on the chat. It's about, here's the real question: should abortion be illegal? Right. And I got to tell you, I've thought about this a bit myself. In the state where I live, it's very legal. There's nothing illegal. There's no restrictions on it. And, as I've thought about it, I think the reason why we want something to be illegal is so that people won't do it, right? People have a tendency to think if something's legal, it's okay to do and it should be done. If they think it's illegal, they tend to have a tendency to think it shouldn't be done. Now, whether something's illegal or not is independent of whether something's immoral or not, right? And so there are things that are immoral, but not illegal, okay? So I'll give you an example of something that's immoral, but not illegal, okay? It is immoral to be a married person and have an inappropriate relationship or an affair with someone else, right? That is immoral. It's not illegal. Now, in the military, that'll get you. That's considered against. It's kind of like a crime in the military. So it's not totally illegal in America. It's an immoral action. And as I think about the issue of abortion, I really think it'd be best for it to be illegal, particularly for the people performing the abortion, not necessarily the mom, but the people performing the abortion, is because, we don't want to encourage it to happen, because every time an abortion procedure is successful, a human dies. Right? Think about that. Every time an abortion procedure is successful, someone dies. So I think there's a certain sense where we want it to be illegal so that people have an ethic. It helps develop their ethic and their mind that, hey, this is probably something I shouldn't be doing, right? It used to be the case that having an affair was illegal, and I'm not making an argument for that, but I think there's a certain sense where, it just can help a society. It can help people make better choices when it is the case. But the reality, this is a cliche. You might have heard this before. You can't legislate morality. In other words, you can't write enough laws to make people behave perfectly moral. They're going to have a moral compass somewhere.
Absolutely. And also on the note of like people cheating on their spouses, if you go far enough back in history, there's a death penalty for that kind of thing back then.
Yes.
Like, yeah, it's just how softened we've gotten as a culture on, like, where on like, the separation of, what's legal and what's moral has started to really shift in vastly different ways over time. But so on this subject of like no, I lost my train of thought. So we're in a state right now, Ohio, where it is actually legal to get an abortion, and there are some states where maybe it's legal, but only in certain scenarios, like say the scenarios we were talking about earlier, where the mother's life is in danger. But also there's some where like it's legal to do it within the first trimester. For example, and some states have even gone down a slippery slope with that, where maybe they've legislated to where like it that first trimester or whatever, and then it starts to expand more. If you were to be writing the laws for Ohio, what would they say?
Well, thanks for asking that question. I actually, this might sound crazy to you. I've never thought of this before, and I want to tell you why I've never thought about this before. Because I don't see this issue as a legal issue.
Fair.
Okay, that's not how
you're my friend now.
Problem.
We're having soft tacos later.
Issue as an issue of the gospel. And what is the antidote to abortion? In my mind, it's the gospel message. Because any of the concerns, if you look at the reasons, like if they poll women on, hey, why did you choose to have this abortion? It's going to be for reasons that living a Christian lifestyle or living according to the scripture is going to reduce. For example, well, I'm not married and I don't really have anyone to provide for our family. Well, in Christianity, it's very clear you should abstain. There is one place that's reserved that kind of intimacy is reserved. That's in a marriage relationship, and oh my goodness, there's roles where the husband needs to provide. Now there are times when the husband can't be provider and the wife is, and I don't mean to be make that particular point, but what I'm trying to say is, two are better than one, and hey, we're going to do this together, and there's support. A lot of time there's coercion in the sense that the father of the baby is saying, hey, you know what, I'll give you the money to have this procedure, but I'll leave you if you continue this pregnancy, right? I mean, that is so incredibly common, so incredibly painful. But just really, let's pause for a second and let's try to, just for a moment, put on our kind of compassion hats and think think from another worldview, like Will, you don't have to say this out loud, and viewers here, I want you to think about what is the biggest problem in your life right now. Just think about what's the biggest challenge you're experiencing or the biggest thing you're facing, okay? Now, what if I told you that all you have to do to get rid of that biggest problem in your life is to pay me $600, and then you have to come to my office one time initially, and then you'll come back one other time, and either I'll give you some pills or we're going to have a small outpatient procedure. $600, and your biggest problem is going to go away. Wouldn't you be tempted by that? I mean, I know that I would. And the truth of the matter is, I have never been in a circumstance where I have had to consider that scenario. All the pregnancies I experienced have been with someone I'm married to in a committed relationship, and we wanted to have kids. I've never been there. But when you think of it in terms of, hey, you don't understand necessarily, and it's not that people are dumb. It's just that we have been lied to. We're told it's a lump of tissue. We're just going to cut out that tissue. So ultimately we've been lied to, these aren't necessarily issues that people think about, and it's very common culturally, right? Like, well, I know that you're into hats, and I think, yeah, you like them. That's a little more rare these days, right? A lot of people wear hats, like ball caps, but not say fedoras. But there was a time and an era when every man had one, everyone. And it would not have been special at all for you to have those hats. In fact, it'd be like, well, yeah, of course you have a hat. It's very common, right? And you wouldn't think twice about it, and your name wouldn't be Fedorable Will, right? Because, sure. It's just so common. Well, imagine being in an environment where abortion's so incredibly common. Your sisters had one, your mom's had one, your aunt, your grandma, your cousin, everybody's having them. It's just the normal part of life, right? And so just, again, I just share that to my compassion. Now, your initial question was, hey, what should the law read? Well, unfortunately, I don't have a good answer. I'll try to spitball something right now because I don't like avoiding questions. I like hitting them head on. Sure. But I think it would read something to the effect of, hey, with the exception of a risk to the mother's life as confirmed by a medical doctor, or maybe like an OBGYN, abortion's not allowed in the state. That's probably what it would look like. I think that's the most consistent with God's law, that concept.
No, I would completely agree with that as well. Yes. Quimbley saying like, oh, God's directions and commands just really show how good of a father he is. Absolutely. I agree. Yeah. Well, we've got about like 15 to 20 minutes left. Was there anything else that you wanted to share from your experiences? Anything else you want to teach?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot if we have time. So, again, we talked a little bit about how do you approach the issue, right? Do you approach it, biologically? We talked a little bit about the biology. We talked a little bit about what's legally true, right? We talked a little bit about what the scriptures have to say about the issue of life. So we might put that in like a moral component. But then we haven't talked too much philosophically. Now, I don't approach the world from a philosophical worldview, but others might. But there's different philosophies. One of them is called utilitarianism. Have you heard of that one, Will? That's made famous by Immanuel Kant.
Yeah. Utilitarian. Or basically, you're just focused on the utility of something and how useful it is.
Yeah. And one of the tests is, well, what if everybody did this? what if everybody did this, right? And so the question, well, what if everyone had an abortion? There wouldn't be any people. We would be completely robbed of people, right? And I think let's look at some, so that's all I really wanted to say about philosophy, that big setup, just to make that point. But even some philosophical frameworks, and I only mentioned one there, but some of them really would speak against the utility or the efficacy or the good idea-ness of that. Wouldn't be a good idea. But let's talk a little bit about China and Russia. Do you know anything about what the Chinese and Russian government are doing right now in relation to children?
I don't know about Russia specifically, but I do know China has a limitation on like how many children you can have and who can have children.
Well, guess what? It's over now. Both China and Russia are begging people to have kids. They are the one-child policy. It's gone, and they're trying to incentivize people to have kids. And and there's a big problem because a lot of families just have one child, and they're not replacing the population. So if you think about what that means to not replace a population, you have more people in the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s than you do in their 10s, 20s, 30s. And there's not enough people to take care of the elderly. There's not enough people in the society to have jobs and to do the work. And it's creating pragmatically significant problems for a society. So a society that either limits its children or kills its children is going to come under just a whole host of pragmatic, practical issues. So even if you're not a person of faith, you should be opposed to this idea of abortion because of what it costs. It's a very costly proposition for the future of a society. It ultimately is going to cause some societies to tumble and to not perform well. And so, I think a real thing, when I think about, this is just kind of a general word here to listeners as we think about the issue of life, we can easily become discouraged. If you think about the state of Ohio, it used to have restrictions. And it used to be, it had to be 22 weeks or less before an abortion. Well, I'm going to clue you in on something. 85% of the abortions happen between week 6 of conception and week 12. So, doesn't matter that it was cut off at 22. 85% of abortions happen that time. But the thing I really, I need to do this more of myself, even though this is kind of my full-time gig here. But the thing I would encourage you to do is you think about the issue of life as maybe you're tempted to become discouraged, or maybe you're thinking about, hey, how could there be over 60 million abortions and God's judgment? What does that mean for God's judgment, on us, right? Maybe you're asking some of those questions, or maybe you ask, hey, how can this happen? Or this is just terrible. And, maybe you're just, experiencing down. I want to encourage you with this. And that is the Lord is on the move, and he cares about his children. He's a loving father. He has not forgotten a single one of his kids. And what I want to encourage you to do whenever you're experiencing this difficulty, this angst, is to pray and to ask Jesus to help the women who are experiencing that unplanned pregnancy today. Pray for your city, pray for your community and say, God, I'm just asking you to come today and to help women, to help families in my community who may be experiencing that. Because, every day of the week, someone finds out they're pregnant and they didn't mean to get pregnant, right? Every day it happens. And so just asking God to come in and to speak to that scenario. And if you do happen to interact with someone who's experiencing that. What I recommend you do is to go ahead and research the pregnancy resource centers in your community, so that, excuse me, instead of just saying, gosh, I don't know what to do, say, hey, have you heard about, XYZ Life Center or XYZ Pregnancy Care Center? Hey, I know, I've researched them some. I know they really help people out in your circumstance. I know all their services are no charge. Can I, help get you an appointment there? Mm-hmm. Right. So that's really what I want to encourage you to think about as you think about this issue, as you maybe even be tempted to become discouraged.
Absolutely. Oh, I missed someone that followed. I believe that's Alex. Let me know if I'm mispronouncing that name there and what you prefer me to call you. But welcome in. It's great to have you here. And thank you, Quimbley, for sticking around. Have a fun time at church. And if there's any other questions, chat, feel free to put them in here. But the one thing I do want to ask you, Steve, is how can the viewers be supporting Life Forward in your ministry?
Well, yeah, I mean, I mentioned about praying. Here you can pray for the ministry. We have a website. All the websites have links, to click on there. The bottom line is there are, millions of different organizations to support. I just would encourage your listeners to say, hey, God, is this, let me give you some examples. There's starving kids in Tunisia. There's starving kids in Paraguay. There's starving kids in Estonia. I mean, all kinds of issues that are really worthwhile, and I would just say, hey, Lord, where do you want me to invest the dollars you've given me, right? Where do you want that to be? If this issue really tugs at your heart and you feel like you want to get involved in that way, then I would say to find the Pregnancy Resource Center that's closest to your community, and play a role with them. Now, I just want to warn you, if you're a man, they're not going to have you meet with the young women experiencing unplanned pregnancy. They're just not going to do that. They might allow you to help with the yard work, or you might, could fold baby clothes, right? But you're not gonna be talking to Stacy Lou about her unplanned pregnancy. But really, just the bottom line is though. But when you help by folding baby clothes or help with yard work, you're helping the center be more beautiful, and you're freeing up the time for someone who is going to meet with that woman who's trained to talk to a woman who is experiencing what feels like a crisis to her and her life. And so, if you want to get involved and you want to volunteer your time, I would recommend that. That could be a really good investment, and it could be a big encouragement. So,
absolutely, that's awesome. Also, welcome in Lava Monster here as well. Did you anything else that you wanted to share with the class?
I just want to, thank you for your desire to grow in wisdom. I think Will just has an amazing heart. Really am grateful to you, Will, for inviting me to come talk on this topic here, because I think there's a certain sense where it's at the very root and core of our society. We're asking these questions. And so I think it's really important to ask these questions to develop our own ethic, but as well, try to see what we can do to be engaged on some spiritual level. So I just have a big thank you. It's been encouraging for me to be here tonight. Believe it or not, the sound of my own voice encourages me. I just like what I have to say. But I really do like some of the truth as I've been reminded here about some of the truth here about the scripture. That this has been an encouraging time for me. So I just want to thank you for your support in the work, and I just give the Lord's blessing to all of your listeners and to you as well. Will, thank you for your example, and thank you for desire that you have to grow in knowledge and wisdom. The Lord is going to answer that, right? It says, seek first the kingdom and his righteousness, and these things will be added to you. So amen. I love you. I'm grateful for you. And thank you so much for having me today.
Yeah, no, it was an honor to have you on as our first guest for these special Wisdom Wednesday segments. We're going to be hitting more hard topics like this on subsequent weeks. We're going to be hitting topics like LGBTQ and things along those lines coming up. So the plan here, chat, is every other week we'll be trading off. We'll be doing the continuing our series, going through concise theology. The book by not Ryle, Packer, by J.I. Packer every other week, and every other week we will be doing hard topics like these. If you have suggestions for topics, hit us up in the Discord in the suggestions channel, or in the feedback channel. That's what it's called. Yeah. Thank you again, Steve, and I am so honored, and hope to see you around for let's grab a beer sometime or something.
Yeah, I'd love to hang out. You're a blessing.
Absolutely. All righty, go ahead and say goodbye, everyone. All right.